All right, everybody, welcome to ADHD, Ferrari engines and bicycle brakes. And I'm so excited to share this information with you, and I really hope it's going to make a huge impact on your lives and really change the way that you view ADHD for the rest of your life. And before we get started, really this information isn't incredibly difficult to understand, but it's really just science and research that's been put together in a way that's very profound and very easy to understand. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. But before we get started, just a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Brady Salcido. I'm the owner of Vitality Family Chiropractic out here in beautiful Thousand Oaks, California. And I'm a graduate of Los Angeles College of Chiropractic. I'm a member of Epic Pediatrics, which is the latest and greatest group of chiropractors that have come together and committed themselves not only to excellence, but to working with children with neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism, ADHD, epilepsy, sensory processing disorder, as well as so many others. And I'm also a member of California Chiropractic Association, the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association, which is the largest pediatric association on the planet, as well as the National Wellness Foundation, which is where doctors have come together to commit themselves to educate their community through workshops or other materials for free. And I have spent hundreds of hours of continuing education specifically geared towards pregnant women and kids, specifically sensory processing disorder, ADHD, and spectrum kids. And really, my passion for working with kids as well as expecting moms comes from my own experience. And if you've heard my story before, it goes a little something like this. So I was born 5 weeks premature, and as I was being delivered, I actually got stuck in the canal. So they decided it was time to use some forceps to get me out. Were unable to get me out through forceps, so they tried using a vacuum. Were able to get me out, but unfortunately, once they got me out, I was born not breathing. So they rushed me to the NICU, and luckily, I'm here speaking with you today. But it really started my life off on a very slippery slope of health, which we'll discuss why that is in a little bit here. But really, I struggled a lot as a kid. My mom used to always say that I was an extremely colicky baby, had a difficult time nursing, had tons of ear infections, and also had Bell's palsy for a little bit, and suffered a lot with respiratory issues. So had tons of bronchitis, sinus infections, pneumonia for a while. And as I got into high school and college, sinus infections were getting worse, and my asthma started to get worse. And I couldn't figure out why things were getting so bad. And it wasn't until a chiropractor finally showed me why my body was not able to function the way it was supposed to and wasn't able to heal the way it was supposed to. And, when I first heard it, I thought he was crazy. And as soon as I went under care with him, it completely and radically changed my life forever. And now I've committed my life and my purpose to working with moms and kids to make sure and ensure that kids have the healthiest start from day one and that moms feel empowered and have the healthiest pregnancy. So I'm looking forward to sharing this information with you today, so I'm so excited that you are watching this. And a little bit about our office, Vitality Family Chiropractic. We specialize in pediatrics, family, and pregnancy, which is very different than what most people assume chiropractors work with, which is back pain and neck pain. But in our office, we see tons of kids with ADHD, autism, anxiety, allergies, asthma, Asperger's, bedwetting, constipations, learning and behavioral issues, sensory processing, sensory integration disorder, headaches, as well as so much more. And we have tons and tons of fun in our office, as well as seeing families and moms coming in to have the healthiest pregnancy ever. So we have tons of fun, but also we get amazing, amazing results in our office. All right, so let's get down to it. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. And probably the most interesting part about that is it's really not a deficit or a disorder, but really it's an imbalance within the brain and central nervous system. Basically, it's a brain and central nervous system that have a very powerful or potent system, really a Ferrari type engine, if you will. But instead of having the normal brakes, they've been giving the brakes of a bicycle. So they now can't slow down, they can't make those proper course corrections. Now, ADHD has two components, really, and the first one is sympathetic overdrive, and this is really kind of the ramping up or kind of the overdrive of the system, and the second one is poorly organized nervous system. And in order to really correct the underlying cause behind ADHD, it needs to be addressed within that order. Similar, if you're going to make a specific turn on a Ferrari, it's a lot easier to make course corrections when you're going at 20 miles an hour rather than when you're flooring the gas pedal down and going 100 miles an hour. And in order to understand what sympathetic overdrive is, the first component of ADHD, we got to understand what the two sides of our brain and central nervous system are. And really there's two sides. The first side is our sympathetic nervous system. And this side is really for survival. It's really our fight or flight response and only intended for short periods of time. So I want you to imagine that you're taking a hike, taking a stroll through the mountains, and all of a sudden you come up on a mountain lion. And it looks like he's about to attack you, so your body goes into this fight or flight mode, or this stress response. Your adrenal glands activate, blood gets rushed away from your vital organs and goes into your muscles, goes and dilates your eyes so that you can either fight or flight. And for the sake of this conversation, we're going to call this our gas pedal mode, or our stress response. Now, the other side of our nervous system is our parasympathetic nervous system. And this side is really intended for our growth and development. And this is where optimal endocrine function live, optimal immune function live, optimal digestive system function live. So if you had to imagine what side you want a person to stay more on, you'd probably say the brake pedal, right? Or the parasympathetic nervous system. But what happens sometimes is we get an imbalance within that system. And really balance is the key between these two systems. We want to be able to properly shift between one or the other. We don't want to get attacked by a mountain lion and then come back home and still think we're being attacked by a mountain lion and still have that stress response within our body. We want to be able to come back, properly rest, digest, relax, and for kids, grow and develop. And really, at the very bottom there, you'll see a quote, probably one of my favorite quotes: you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. So when you're being attacked, your body is not thinking about resting, relaxing, or digesting, right? But what happens a lot of times with kiddos with ADHD is they get stuck on this sympathetic activity and really have an excess amount of this sympathetic activity. And this is probably the most common component we notice or see with ADHD kiddos. And if you think of a nervous system or brain that's stuck in a stress response, how does this usually manifest? As hyperactivity, impulsiveness, and behavioral issues. Think of yourself, if you're stuck in kind of a stressful scenario, you're going to be a little hyperactive. You're going to be a little impulsive, and your behavior is going to change, right? And here is a picture of a scan that we do in the office here. And what you're seeing here is, what we want to see is that black line right here that I'm pointing at fits within these white voids. And as long as that's even within there, we have healthy, optimal nervous system function. As soon as we get outside those white voids, it's going to come up as different colors for us. And even if it goes inside, it's going to come up as a yellow color, like that. And what it's going to do is it's going to give us some numbers that we can use to check for the health and stress on the central nervous system. And the top number here is our pattern score. And this is letting me know organization that's coming into the brain, or organization within the nervous system. And this one down here is total energy. And this is dealing with the stress response in the brain, or more importantly, how stuck are we on the gas pedal mode, or our sympathetic activity. So with excess sympathetic activity, we're going to see that that total energy number is very high. We want to see it around 150 or below. So for this kid, you can see he is more than double that. So really we have a ton of stress or excess sympathetic activity going on within the central nervous system. And then the second component is poorly organized nervous system. Now, this is probably the most overlooked component of ADHD, and this is really where a lot of the attention, confusion, and organizational challenges come from, and leads to more sensory processing and integration getting off track here. And really the best way to explain this is the kids are spinning so fast and they're going so fast because of this sympathetic activity that they can't slow down to go through the normal developmental processes. So social, academic, behavioral, physical, and speech delays may occur during this time. And if we look at our scan here that we were just talking about here, what you'll see is that the total energy is right around normal, right? We want to see that around 150 or below. But what are we seeing in the pattern score? Pattern score, we want to see that around 70 to 100. And for this kid, much lower, right? Almost half the score that we want. So we wanted that to be much higher than that. So we're seeing that's where a lot of these organizational issues are coming from. And we can see that in our scans there. So how in the world does the spine fit into all this? You probably saw ADHD and chiropractic and were thinking, how in the world does that work? And really this comes from a very big misconception. And really the main key I want to focus on here is that your spine is much more than just a sack of bones, muscles, and ligaments. But really the spine is the protective housing for your brain and central nervous system. It's really a huge, huge part of that. And really, anytime we have issues within our central nervous system, we really need to look at the spine first because that spine is the protective housing around that. So one of the first things we're going to look at that could affect the spine is birth trauma. And most of the neurodevelopmental cases that we see in our office can be traced back to the birth process. And nearly half of the cases that we see come from C-sections. And C-sections are very hard on a child. They're very life-saving, absolutely. But unfortunately, with those life-saving measures, sometimes consequences do occur. And really the main issue is that the baby's head and neck are used as leverage. So instead of the mom being able to use the muscles and being able to push the baby out as the doctor guides, now we cut through all those layers of muscle, mom's no longer able to push, and the baby's head and neck are basically used as leverage. So the doctor is pulling from the baby's head and neck. And studies have shown that there is about 60 to 90 pounds of pressure put on the infant's delicate spine as well as their nervous system as well. If I were to take a little baby and show them to you by lifting up its head and neck and just kind of dangling them down, you'd call child services on me. You'd say I'm absolutely nuts. Now strap another 60 to 90 pounds on that, and that's the kind of pressure that we're looking at with these C-sections. So very, very stressful on kids. And most of the other time that we see other interventions used, such as Pitocin, forceps, vacuum, epidural. So me, I had 2 of the 4, so batting 500. Not too bad, huh? But this is proven to increase stress on the child. So really this is a huge part of when you come into the office. We really take a big look at what happened during the birth process and see if that could be playing a huge issue with ADHD. And there is research done by a very famous doctor called Dr. Gottfried Gutmann. He was a medical doctor, and what he did is he examined 1,000 infants. And what he found that spinal injury was present in about 80% of the infants he examined shortly after birth, and found that it was causing interference to their neurological and immune function. And this is what we call a subluxation. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But he concluded in this research that the upper cervical spine should be examined after all births and corrected by a chiropractor if necessary. And there was another one. Viola Freeman examined 1,500 newborns within 5 days of birth. And what she found is that 90% suffered birth trauma from birth. And what she found is 10% of newborns had perfect or freely movable skulls and cranial mechanisms, so completely healthy. And then she found that 10% had suffered severe trauma to the head and upper neck, which is very evident even to an untrained eye. And this can be seen as bruising or misshapen skulls, even torticollis. But one of the more startling facts or evidence that she came across was that 80% of those newborns had signs of strain to the neck and cranium that weren't obvious. So this also, again, is the subluxation that we're looking for. So 80% of these kids may have signs of subluxation or stress to their neck and cranium, birth trauma, that have gone unnoticed. Trauma from the birth process remains an underpublicized and therefore significantly undertreated problem, and how true that is with how many kids we're seeing in here that have had stressful births. So where does it start? And what we're going to take a look at here is an example of a C-section here. And the World Health Organization says there's no reason for our C-section rate to be above 5 to 10%. But right now our average rates are from 30 to 40%. So yes, they can be life-saving, but we're way beyond where we need to be, and it's starting to affect the health of our kids. So if you're a little squeamish, feel free to look away or fast forward through this video, but here's an example of a C-section.
Irritated. Oh, there you go, fella. Come on, buddy. All right. Ears of a girl. Ears of a girl. Make you cute for the camera.
Oh, yes. He's coming back.
There you go.
All right.
Look at those big old testicles, though. Have another boy.
So you can see just how much stress has happened on the child's spine just through this C-section. It's incredible the amount of stress, and most of the time it's funny because, dad's up with the mom. There's a big curtain above the mom so she can't see what's going on. And most of the time the parents have no idea that this has even happened, and this is pretty routine in terms of a C-section. So we can see where a lot of this stress on the upper neck really stems from. And just as a side note, I haven't seen a C-section child yet who doesn't at least have a mild upper cervical or upper subluxation of their neck. And an interesting thing here is subluxation can be present prior to the birth, and this really happens especially with breech positioning, where the child hasn't been able to reach that optimal positioning that we like to see in the pelvis and has become contorted, and that can really lead to that first subluxation as well. And birth can be traumatic, even a completely natural birth. Birth is a stressful time. It can be a beautiful time, but also a stressful time for mom and baby. So that's why we love checking kiddos after births, even natural births, just to ensure that everything's in its right place and we're ensuring optimal health from day one. So important. So subluxation, we've been talking about subluxation here, so let's go over what the three main components of a subluxation consist of. And the first two are when a joint of the spine comes misaligned and fixated, so it gets out of that normal position and gets stuck there, losing its ability to go through the proper range of motion. So imagine if you have a hinge on a gate, comes out of its normal alignment there, gets stuck, we can't open and close that gate the way we want to, and really we kind of lose function of that gate, right? And the most common area that we see is in the upper neck, as you see that picture there, and that's definitely one of the most common ones we see, especially after C-section or traumatic birth. But the third component is probably the most crucial and absolutely the most troublesome part of the subluxation, and that's really the neurological imbalance or neurological interference that takes place. And the first part is dyskinesia. And dyskinesia is when abnormal alignment and fixation, just as we talked about, starts to cause that vertebrae to come out of its normal alignment. And what that does is it affects the normal neural input into the brain. So let's take a look at that real quick. And really, your brain is fed through movement. And movement is perceived by the brain as this very fancy word called proprioception. 60% of the nerves in our body pick up this movement, 60% of the nerves that pick up this movement live in the spine. So 60% of the nerves that pick up this proprioceptive input or proper healthy brain food live in the spine. And 33% of those nerves live in the upper neck. So if we have a subluxation that occurs in the upper neck, that's going to affect 33% of that proprioceptive or positive brain food that needs to reach the brain. And the main job of over half the nerves in the spine is to carry this movement information. And really, movement is life. And this proprioception or positive brain food has an extremely calming effect on the spine, an extremely positive effect on the nervous system. And really what it does is it stimulates the parasympathetic or brake pedal. So stimulates healthy digestive, immune system function, endocrine function, and more importantly, stimulates optimal growth and development. So this movement or proprioception is extremely, extremely important. But what happens is that when we get these subluxations, it's going to affect that input going into the brain. So now we're no longer getting that positive brain food, and instead we're going to get a stress response into the brain. And this leads to something called disafferentation. And disafferentation is that stress input that's now reaching the brain. And what that does is it puts the brain and central nervous system into a stress response, and it activates that gas pedal mode or the sympathetic nervous system, which leads into sympathetic overdrive. And once the brain and central nervous system get into this system override or sympathetic override, that gas pedal mode, that's going to affect the child's output, right? So now the last part of this is we're going to see some abnormal energy output and control. So that's where the ADHD and all these other symptoms that we see of the subluxation, of this neurological imbalance come from. So what in the world does the chiropractic adjustment do for our children, for the subluxation? How do we get rid of these subluxations? And really what we do is we do a chiropractic adjustment, which restores the proper alignment and motion in that joint, which removes the first D, so puts that joint back where it needs to be, which then restores the proper incoming flow of proprioception, or that positive, healthy brain food. This then balances the autonomic nervous system, calming the sympathetics or activating that parasympathetic activity that we want, which then restores normal energy output and organization to normal levels, which is always safe and gentle. With kids, we don't have 20 to 30 years of degeneration going on in the spine, so with all our adjustments, they're extremely gentle and effective.
Hello, my name is Virginia, and I've been bringing my son Gabriel to Dr. Brady for a little while now. I met him at my gym and overheard him talking about how he helps children with different learning disabilities and physical issues, and it sounded like he could really help my son. So I brought him in, and he has been helping my son so much. After his third visit here, my son stopped his eye blinking, his neck rotations that he was doing, kind of like a twitch, and he has not been doing those. After about 10 visits, I got a report from his school that he had done some work on his own, completed it, and it was all correct, which is unheard of for him, and we are just so pleased with his progress. He has been growing in school academically, he has been growing socially. Other teachers have been telling me they've noticed such a huge difference in his socialization at school. And the biggest thing for me is when I pick him up from school now, he jokes with me and he tells me he loves me, which is not something he used to do, and he hugs me. Not an affectionate child. And now, as his body, I feel, is starting to heal, he is starting to just be, as I say, in the room, when before he just seemed like he was so far away. So I can't thank Dr. Brady enough, and I'm just so thankful to be here.
And that's really our whole mission here at Vitality Family Chiropractic, is to really empower kids and whole families to express their health at 100% and restore optimal function of the brain and nervous system. And we just see incredible results, just like the testimony you just saw there. And we have tons of other testimonials on our website, so feel free to check those out. So next question I always get is, how do I know if my child has one of these subluxations? And you just saw a picture of those scans that we're talking about. That is the latest technology that is available. And it's the same scan they use on astronauts to make sure that they have healthy nervous system function as well. And the best thing about it is there's no radiation, no pain, and it's safe to use on kids, babies, and adults. So we use it on all our patients in our office to make sure everyone has a healthy spine and nervous system. So let's look at some other common ingredients here. Let's see what else is going on behind ADHD. So one of the big ones is lack of proper exercise and fitness. So these can have similar effects to a subluxation. And really, when we're inactive, it's going to start causing a stress response in the body. Some people get that as, I just need to start moving. I need to get outside. I need to do something. And really, exercise is more of a global adjustment. So any adjustment we do in our office is a very specific segmental exercise. And it's really to restore proper motion in that joint, thus restoring proper neurological input into the brain. And exercise is really a global adjustment. So after we've gotten that adjustment, it's really important that kids exercise and continue to move their bodies to stimulate that proper proprioception into the brain. And study after study has proven that physical exercise helps kids pay attention, calm them down, do better in school, and have better organizational skills. And that's really the effect of proprioception on the brain, of that good, healthy brain food. So if we're not receiving all that because we have a subluxation in the spine, that's going to dramatically affect what we see on the outside. And diet, and unfortunately the diet of a typical American child is awful, absolutely awful. And as a baby, breast milk is entirely dependent on the mom. So if the mom is eating terrible, the breast milk's not going to be as healthy, but obviously it's much better than formula, which is now mostly sugar nowadays. If you look at an Infamil or anything like that, one of the first things you'll see is high fructose corn syrup, which is essentially sugar. And we're putting that into a bottle and giving it directly to our baby. and that's not good at all. And then as the baby grows and develops into a child, it's time to recommend cow's milk and cereal grain as the first foods. And really, those are some of the worst things we could be giving our kids. At a year old, year and a half old, that could be some of the worst things that we're giving. And now kids are getting on some of these things at 6 months, which is even harsher on their body. So maybe this is the first time you've heard this. So what in the world is wrong with milk? I drank it when I was younger. What's the problem? Really, the main issue is this thing called casein. And casein is a protein found in cow's milk that is extremely difficult to digest, especially for kids. There's a quote that I heard out there that only baby calves are meant to drink cow's milk. We have breast milk. They have milk from a cow. There's no reason for kids to be drinking cow's milk. And one of the main reasons is casein is so hard to digest. And this often causes an immune reaction that can look a lot like hyperactivity and behavioral issues, not to mention it causes tons of inflammation in the body. And it is highly, highly, highly processed. And they do it through 2 ways. One is pasteurization, where they basically take the milk, boil it to incredibly high temperatures, trying to kill off all bad bacteria. But unfortunately, when you do that, we can't be specific, so we also kill off all the good probiotic bacteria in there. So now we're just left with milk, with none of the good or bad benefits. And then lastly, they homogenize it, which basically is putting it through a tiny, tiny filter to make it more milkier, creamier, more palatable. And essentially what that does is it changes the composition of the milk, so now it's not as recognizable to the body, which helps cause inflammation within the body. All right, so what about grains? And often this is a child's very first food, so as soon as they can eat, we're putting them on different puffs, putting on cereal, putting on crackers. And really the main thing here that we're focusing on is grains, when they enter the body, turn into sugar. And sugar, when it's entered into the body, stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, which, if you have a child with ADHD who is stuck on sympathetic activity or stuck on the gas pedal, last thing you want to do is give them sugar and make them increase that even more, right? We want to do the opposite. We want to stimulate that brake pedal for them. There's a great quote I heard. It was, air, food, and water are essential for life. And we polluted all 3. And how true is that? And the best evidence we have for that is in 2004, researchers analyzed umbilical cord samples from 10 neonates, or 10 newborns, from August to September. And what they tested for was 400 specific chemicals. And so they took the blood from these umbilical cord samples and analyzed it for these chemicals. And what they found were 287 of these present within the blood. 180 of these were known to be carcinogen or cancer causing. 217 of these were known to be toxic to the brain and nervous system, which is still developing in the baby. And 207 of those are known to cause birth defects. So we're finding these in the blood that's being transferred from mom to baby, so we can see just how toxic our environment is. And lastly, kids are deficient. So our brain needs things to grow and develop properly. One of those is omega-3 fatty acids, so good, healthy fats, whether it be fish oils or flaxseed oil. Healthy oils are very important. They're healthy omega-3 fatty acids. And second, plants. Kids do not eat enough veggies these days. We're force feeding them so much gluten, dairy, that they're not getting enough plants, and they're also not getting enough water. Most kids are stuck on juice, soda, and really just dehydrates the whole body, and this can look a lot like ADHD. And one of the main things, too, that we see with sympathetic overdrive, or really being stuck on the sympathetic nervous system, is that it weakens their immune system. So a lot of times when we take the history of a child coming into our office, we find a lot of incidences of ear infections, asthma, sinus infections, allergies, as well as other examples of chronic illnesses or issues going on within their immune system. And really, especially with ear infections and asthma, we see a frequent antibiotic use. And unfortunately with antibiotics, it's the same thing as pasteurization. It's trying to kill all the bacteria within the body. So yes, you destroy the bad bacteria, but you also destroy the good bacteria with that as well. And 70% of your immune system lives within this gut bacteria, within your gut system. So when a child takes these antibiotics, it completely destroys all this good, healthy gut bacteria and really leaves them more susceptible to future infections. So especially when we're looking at kids with ear infections, which is mostly viral in nature, we see a common recurrence of ear infections, and we see chronic ear infections, which then leads to other interventions and tube surgeries, and unfortunately all those other measures that we want to avoid at all costs. Next, electronics. So studies have shown that lights from electronic devices, mobile devices, television, engage the sympathetic nervous system, or engage this gas pedal mode. And this also causes areas of the brain for creativity, imagination, and organization to go dormant. So it basically shuts them down. And we see that a lot when kids are just having texting or they're playing video games. They just zone out, right? Creativity, imagination, organization goes out the window. So make sure we try to keep our kids off those electronics as much as possible. Whew. All right, so that was a lot of information. Wow. Okay, so let's try to sum this up. So ADHD has two components, right? We have the sympathetic overdrive, which is the overdrive of our sympathetic nervous system. And second is a poorly organized nervous system. And your spine is the middleman between the brain and the body, and it houses and protects your nervous system. And there was a great line I heard, if your spine were on your face, you'd take much better care of it. And that is so true, because that spine is really the conduit for our nervous system. So if there are issues going on in our spine, that's going to directly affect our nervous system and our brain as well. And since there are two components of ADHD that are governed by the nervous system, which is housed by the spine, doesn't it make sense to get that checked? So our first step in our series of action steps that we're going to give you is you need to get checked by a pediatric chiropractor who utilizes this technology, the inside subluxation station, that measures and tracks the neurological components of the subluxation, which is extremely important in determining your progress. And two, more exercise and outdoor play. Children need to get out more into the world, start moving their bodies. So great things are to enroll them in soccer, swimming, martial arts, get them active, get them outdoors, away from the TV. Next, clean up diet and environment. Start by adding more veggies, fruits, removing the pesticides, preservatives, and obviously sugars as well as dairy. And second is fourth is unplug. So limit or remove the time spent watching TV, on the computer, electronics, especially before bed. We always recommend at least an hour and a half to 2 hours before bed. Make sure they are unplugged and away from the television, away from the iPads and computers, so that they can start engaging that brake pedal mode and start resting, relaxing, and growing and developing the way we need them to. And then lastly, don't give up. So there's a line I like to use. It's called nerves that fire together, wire together. So if the nervous system's been stuck in this excessive sympathetic overdrive and a poorly organized nervous system for a long time, it takes some time to get it back firing the way we want it to. So especially as kids get under care and we start removing these roadblocks and removing these subluxations and start balancing out the nervous system, it takes some time, but we get the job done. So in other words, it may take some time to get things under control, but stay the course, stay strong, and don't give up.